Good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Digital Anarchist, and welcome to what really was my favorite panel of today's Predict 2020 virtual event, and that is the DevSecOps panel, and it's called Aim for the Stars, Predicts 2020 Security Panel. Let me first of all introduce you to what I think is a fantastic lineup of DevSecOps experts, and I may actually ask them to introduce themselves, their title, and their company. And I'm going to start with Ron Harnick. Ron, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Ron, based in Israel. I work for Palo Alto Networks. I lead product marketing for Prisma Cloud, which is our cloud-native security platform. I used to work for PureSec, the serverless security platform, that was acquired about 6 months ago by Palo Alto Networks, and now it's part of Prisma Cloud as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron Harnick. And then, Andre, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'm Andre Bestadano. I'm Chief Architect at Zero North. I've been with Zero North for about 3.5 years. Prior to this, I spent most of my career in financial services developing quantitative models and trading systems.
Okay, and then next, you know what, Shri, let's have you introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Shri San. I'm also based in Israel and basically working as a senior product manager at WhiteSource, where we try to manage open source and open source security in better ways.
Excellent. And then certainly last but certainly not least, my friend Tim Jarrett. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alan. My name is Tim Jarrett. I'm Senior Director of Product Management at Veracode. I've been here for about not quite 12 years, working on our application security platform and our solutions for application security testing. I've been around the industry, Microsoft and other software companies before that.
Absolutely. In 12 years, Tim, I assume you kind of got the Veracode. You understand what they're doing over there by now, huh?
I hope so, yes.
So, all four of you, thanks for joining us today. Let's dive right into our panel. The meat and potatoes of it is, you know, when I started DevOps.com, I really got into DevOps because of security. I thought it was the best thing that can happen to security. And over the course of these 6 years, I've seen, you know, the mingling of the security and DevOps tribes, and at first we called it rugged DevOps was a name, SecOps, DevSec, and we came to DevSecOps maybe 4 years ago. Shannon Leach started DevSecOps.org, and there was a lot of pushback, whether it was a real thing. What are we doing? You know, there was a lot of mistrust on both sides. Here's the good news. I really feel, and I speak to so many people, that over the last year and a half, DevSecOps, people don't doubt that it's a thing anymore, that it's real, that there's a real push towards what we have labeled DevSecOps. You don't want to call it DevSecOps, that's up to you. But what it represents is real. I'm interested, the four of you, you live this life every day. Do you think it's real? Are you seeing acceptance in the audience? What does that look like for us going forward? And Tim, since you went last, I'm going to give you the chance to kick it off for us.
Absolutely, and I agree with your timeline and also with your observations. One of the things I get to do at Veracode is to work on our State of Software Security report. And for the last couple of years, we've been working on quantifying what we see for organizations that are doing frequent software testing, that are embedding software testing into their development process. And you know, we are seeing an increasing adoption of that, and we're seeing actual quantitative benefits from it. People being able to close vulnerabilities faster, people being able to close more of the vulnerabilities in their population. So it's definitely real. What I would say is it's kind of like the William Gibson law about the future, which is that it's here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. There's still a whole lot of organizations for which security testing hasn't shifted left, but just about everybody is aspirational in that direction, and it's in all of the conversations that we have with organizations that are looking to do application security testing.
Sure. The rest of our panel, feel free to chime in.
I can jump. Go ahead, Ron. That's fine.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I think the whole idea of shifting left, which it might be a buzzword, but it's a good one, and it's one that we hear a lot from the customers themselves, and that's why I feel comfortable using it. Kind of goes hand in hand with how software development has evolved over the last few years, right? So as more of these massive enterprises or these massive companies that used to do things in a very traditional way where they would develop and then they would hand off to security, and security would be sort of a gate in order to go to production. As they adopt stuff like containers and serverless and the more microservice-based forms of software development, the new sort of paradigm shift that has to come with security really goes hand in hand with that, right? So when we talk about shifting left and integrating into stuff like IDEs and CI pipelines and putting security as early as possible, I mean, I really see it as something that's inevitable. And I think that I might be biased towards serverless just because of my background, but I think that things like Lambda and serverless are really a fascinating example for that, because it's at the intersection between security and development, right? So it really illustrates that type of example where there's no other choice other than put security as close to the application as possible. So yeah, I do agree with Tim and I agree with Alan about DevSecOps is a thing wherever you want to call it. Shift left is real. I think my favorite quote was from a customer of ours that said, I want to shift security so far left that I'll get into the developer's brain, which really kind of reflects the place where a lot of security architects are now.
Good. I like that quote too. Andre, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think about DevSecOps as a cultural phenomenon. We got to DevOps by bringing together development, QA, and operations and breaking down the walls between those teams in an effort to accelerate the pace of software development and deliver higher quality software. That never meant more secure software, at least at the beginning. But now that's not an option anymore. That's a requirement. It has to happen. So now it's a matter of shifting that culture to embrace security. And that includes people, process, and technology. The people are getting on board. The process needs to follow. It needs to converge with the traditional automation that we that was born through the DevOps initiatives. And now the security tools have to be there as well to support that process. So to me, that's something that's happening. It's inevitable. And it's the right time for people to embrace that. Sure. Because we're ready for it.
You know, we talk about sort of some of these megatrends you guys have mentioned as being catalysts for this adoption of DevSecOps. I don't think we could have this conversation without recognizing the importance of open source software, right? And Cherie, I know at White Source, I mean, you guys are experts there, but certainly the adoption of open source components making up 75–80% of the content of many applications has also been a catalyst, I think, in the adoption of DevSecOps and then more specifically maybe even securing these open source components. Cherie, what?
I definitely agree. I think that if we look at the common way or the old way of handling security issues in the software development lifecycle, we look at security teams basically analyzing, prioritizing vulnerabilities. We see users or developers sending emails to those security team if they need to add a component or change something. And if 90% of your code is open source and you start using open source components every day, and you have open source components that are being updated very frequently, you cannot basically close the loop this way. It doesn't work anymore. And I think this is why we have to shift left, and we have to we cannot be gatekeepers anymore. We have to basically just build the guardrails, but we cannot be standing at the gate and basically creating a bottleneck for the entire organization. And I think that the main idea here is basically to avoid bottlenecks in the process. I mean, if the process slows us down, it needs to be changed somehow. And I definitely think that this is what we see with this entire revolution.
Yep. So I think it was Andre said something about getting in the heads of developers, or perhaps it was Ron. But, again, reflecting back before we project where we're going, to me, the fundamental shift has been that security companies, security vendors, such as the four of your companies, have recognized that in order to do this shift left, in order to be more effective, security tools that we designed for security professionals were not going to do the job put into the hands of developers and DevOps, SREs, QA folks. We needed to design security tools that were designed for the use and the kind of security skill level, if you will, of developers and DevOps. And so that to me is a fundamental shift, right? Security vendors making tools not necessarily just for the security team, but for everyone in the CI/CD software development lifecycle. Do you agree, disagree? And if you agree, what has your company done to kind of down that road? And I'll throw it out to the whole panel and give each of you a chance to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I think, first of all, there's sort of this myth that developers don't care about security, which I think is something that was perpetuated by people like me who work in marketing. And I don't think it's true. I think Shiri made a really good point about if a process is not fast enough, then that's where the problem is. So it's not that developers don't care about security. They definitely care about the health and uptime and operations of the thing that they're building. So they do, of course, care about security, but they care about agility just the same, right? So they care about the process being very streamlined and very, very fast. If security imposes some sort of threat to that agility, that's where there is some friction, and that's where maybe the whole thing about like developers, they just kind of want to run and break things and they don't care about security, which I don't think is true. What I think our companies are all doing is building our products in a way where integration is easier, right? So the whole idea of shift left that we talked about, and we established that with containers and serverless and microservices and cloud native services and all these types of things, the shift is inevitable. So I think all of us are making an effort to build the product in a way where integration into their IDEs, into their Jenkins build process or whatever they might be using is seamless and easy and doesn't really get in the way. And maybe sometimes doesn't even require a lot of input from the developer. Maybe we're able to do something without actually getting in their way, or we're able to do it early enough in the process for them not to do a lot of work to and then throw that work away. I think a little example is, for example, let's say you're taking a look at a container image and you're taking a look at, does this image have any vulnerabilities in it? So it'll be the difference between, do I just kick this back to the developer and say like, hey, I found some vulnerabilities in this image? Or do you kick it back to the developer and say, this is the exact layer within that container image where you have vulnerabilities, and this is the exact thing you have to fix, and this is how you fix it, and you make the whole thing much easier. So collaboration actually becomes easier between security and dev. Doesn't matter how you want to really call it. My experience, at least lately, talking with customers, have been that that people seem to get it. I mean, people seem to get it, and people seem to be pretty excited about our security tools from all of these different companies, just making the collaboration part of it a little bit easier. So since now you have so many different stakeholders, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to double down on what Ron said, which is that developers absolutely want security. They want to build more secure applications, and there's no question about their motivation. There's no question about that. But they do live in a world of IDEs, of code repos, of CI/CD pipelines. We have to be able to embed the security tools in that environment, in their IDEs seamlessly. As they write code, they write more secure code. We have to embed the security tools in their CI/CD pipelines and keep the continuous aspect of it. We can introduce long scanning times because that process is no longer continuous. So to the extent that we can do that, and I believe that now we can, they will happily embrace security. They will embrace the process. They will embrace the tools. And from our perspective at Zero North, what we're focusing on is building a platform that enables developers and development teams to do exactly that, to seamlessly embed the tools in their existing processes, in their existing pipelines, in their existing code repos, integrate with them, provide back to those tools that they're familiar with all the information about vulnerabilities that are being detected and remediated. And at the same time, allowing the security teams to be part of the process and to encode their security policies in the tools that the developers are familiar with by introducing the appropriate gates in their CI/CD process, allowing it to move as fast as possible, just as it did before, unless there are significant issues, in which case those gates will stop the progression of the pipelines. So I do think that that's why we're able to converge on this DevSecOps reality, because the developers are not just accepting it, but they're embracing security in the frameworks, in the tools that they've been using for a long time already.
Sri?
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you. I think that it's not only about being where the developers are in terms of the IDEs and all of that, like the tools, but it's also giving them the actionable information. I mean, if we give them the 3 pages that we write about each vulnerability that the security person is interested in, probably they're not going to read it, they're not going to do anything with it. So it's really about, I mean, it's not that developers don't care about security, but they also want to finish their tasks as fast as they can and move on to the next feature. So we need to keep that in mind and basically just giving them the actionable information that they need in order to remediate the vulnerability. We don't have to give all the background that the security person may have been interested in. So basically for us, it's giving, the maximum impact in minimum actions and minimum effort on the developer side. An example to that in WhiteSource would be, for example, our repository integrations. So basically what we do is there are existing processes. So we look at the process of code review, for example, the process where a developer team leader or someone from the development team actually looks at your code and validates that it doesn't have any functional issues or any bugs and that the code is written correctly. And now as security, we want to actually validate that this code also doesn't have security vulnerabilities. So in that case, we will basically highlight, hey, team leader, see that this developer also added 3 new security vulnerabilities with a high risk to the code. And this is something that the development team leader can take into account and then either, not merge the code or do something with it. But it's basically just highlighting that to the team leader or to the developer and making sure that they are aware of what they are doing.
Excellent. Tim, everyone's in violent agreement. Are you in violent agreement as well, or what do you think?
No, I think that there have been a lot of good points made, and I think that a lot of what you see in the way that our companies have responded to developers comes from, just we fundamentally have to change who we're building our solutions for, and and kind of orient them around the outcomes that we want for those individuals. And I think that it's been really healthy for the application security space because it doubles down on kind of the value proposition for a tool in the security space, which is not, the outcome a customer pays for is not for you to find all of their issues. The outcome that they pay for ultimately is for you to be able to fix as many of the issues as you can, and provide the development team with what they need to do that and to do that quickly. I get reminded of this when we bring in security tools into our own development processes, and they end up providing a 500-page PDF that we are expected to hand over to the development team, and you go, no, that's not going to work. What we've done over the past couple of years is really, it's not so much that the fundamentals tools that look for security vulnerabilities change so much. It's all of the stuff that you do with that information, how you invoke them, and what you do to make them easy to use by developers that changes. I think if I could be allowed to cite two examples. One is when we pulled our static analysis capability into an IDE and made it focus on just the work that the developer is doing right there at the time, and really focus on minimizing the elapsed time between the developer introducing something and our identifying that there's an issue there. And it's all about DevOps theory. Let's close that feedback loop, make it as quick as possible so the developers can learn and can do something about the issue while they still have what they're working on in their head. The other thing I'd call out is kind of rethinking what you want to do for delivering information to developers. If you're looking at open source library information, why not just give the developer a pull request that says, use this version of the library instead? So I think it's really exciting because it allows us to go after the fundamental problems and to help really address the root issue much better than if you're, and nothing against security people, but they're not the ones who ultimately are going to fix the issues.
Nothing against them. Understood. So guys, we only have maybe 10 minutes or so in our panel time, and I think we've done a good job of setting the table, but now it's time to talk about what does the future hold here. We've seen these fundamental changes. We now, everyone agrees that almost everyone agrees that developers care about security. All four of your organizations are a good representative of the security industry in a whole. We're making tools that are better designed for the developers, for the DevOps people. At the same time, we still need to let our security professionals have insight, oversight, and some control here. And so we need, we serve two masters at some level, and it's hard to serve two masters. Tools that developers and DevOps can use, but that's the security professionals still get their value from, because after all, it is their budget and they need to approve these things. So I'm going to ask each of you, and guys, let's try to keep our answers to a minute or less for each of you, because we're stretching out. What is this bode for 2020 and beyond? Where do you see your organizations and the industry as a whole going in trying to serve these two masters? Okay, Andre, I'm going to let you start off, and then each of you can chime in, and don't wait for me. Just feel free to add to the conversation. Andre, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, sounds good. So I actually think we have a single master because the goals of the development and security teams are fully aligned, and they both want the same thing. So it's a single goal, single team, the DevSecOps team. And what we need to do is enable them to converge the tools that they use, to converge all the angles of security, and bring together application security, infrastructure security, cloud security, container security, all the telemetry that we can connect, bring it together into one single place and look at it holistically in order to understand the security posture of the application of the organization. And I think we can do that by just looking at it holistically as a single entity and a single master, in my opinion.
Okay, excellent. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I think that the next steps for where we're going are going to be around scaling what we see small successful teams doing already. I think that just like with DevOps, as experimentation on the team level kind of translates over time into more enterprise standards for how pipelines work, that you're going to see the same thing happen in DevSecOps. So what all of us are going to be struggling with is how do you roll out kind of this sort of secure development processes at scale in a way that empowers the development teams and allows the security team the visibility that they need. And I agree with Andre, it's about telemetry, and it's about making sure that we have the data to support the common goal that everybody's working for.
Yeah, if I look at like the next year, maybe the next few years even, what I think we as companies should focus on is definitely the prioritization. Because if we look at it in an average application, we may have like hundreds, even more of security vulnerabilities. And I think the hardest thing for developers, developer team leaders, is to actually understand what should I resolve or remediate first. And I think we need to give them the tools to actually do this prioritization in a better way, sort of telling them this is the first thing you should handle, this is the next. And also I think it should take into account both the business priority, but also, so for example, for a vulnerability, whether it's even exploitable. Has someone exploited this vulnerability in the past? What is the severity? What is the availability of fixes? And we sort of have to combine that into one score, so to say, that will give the team leader the actual prioritization of what they need to handle first, what they need to handle next.
Excellent. Ron?
I think these are all really good points, and I think there's a few things that we need to consider. One, that I know that at least for me, kind of working almost exclusively on cloud, it's very easy to forget that a lot of the large companies out there, or even most of the very large companies out there, are still in the middle of their migration to the cloud and journey to the cloud. So born in the cloud companies from like the last 5 years, they're cloud native, they're implementing those microservices, CI pipelines, all of that, and we're definitely going to see that continue to scale and grow. I think that as time goes on and into 2020, I think we're going to see that the migration from more legacy systems and on-prem systems and the way that security works in those types of worlds is going to get easier moving into the AWSs and GCPs and those types of systems. And I think we're going to see a lot more focus on implementing systems that prevent those alerts from happening in the first place. So an example, so the same process that we're seeing with security is also happening with infrastructure, right? With things like Terraform and CloudFormation, so infrastructure as code, where developers are more involved in that as well. So I think we're going to see more of companies like ours doing things like looking at infrastructure as code templates, fixing those security issues before they ever get pushed into production, and trying to reduce the amounts of alerts and vulnerabilities that ever make it to production, making those applications stronger earlier on in the process. But yeah, I think we're all super excited for it.
Agreed. Guys, I'm going to pose one last topic for each of you to comment on, and then I think, unfortunately, we're going to be out of time. And that is that. For those in our audience out here today who are security professionals, right, but have drunk the Kool-Aid for DevSecOps, right, and they understand now, right, they need to work with their DevOps team members and their developers. What's the single most important thing they could do this coming year in working with their developer teams, their DevOps, their SRE teams, to move the needle, to tangibly increase the security of their organization? One piece of advice that we can give them to take with them. Anybody? I don't want to put anyone on the spot and give you a chance to think, but anyone want to go first here?
Yeah, I think all of us can agree that the number one thing they can do is buy all our stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be all about collaboration. I think it's going to be like before they actually set out and start to look at tooling and solutions out there. It's going to be about bringing all of those stakeholders to the table and making sure that everybody agrees on the same goals. I think that at larger companies, these things can get tied up in like organizational politics and who does what and silos and stuff like that. So the first step is going to be trying to break those down in a shared goal. Maybe that's in the way that that they set their goals, where the KPIs and goals for security teams should be tied very closely to those of the development teams. So they have to work together. I think that's kind of step one. And yeah, step two, buy all our stuff.
I think it's all about the processes, really. So as Ron mentioned, the first step is like know your goal. Like if you're going to bake security into existing workflows, this can be one of the goals. And then the next step would be to identify the processes. So like as we mentioned, the code review example, where in the process can I have the automation of security? So if we look at the development, maybe we can highlight the vulnerabilities in the IDEs or in the repositories, or maybe I want to fail builds if I find a security vulnerability. And in the container registry and in the deployment in Kubernetes. Basically, the next step would be just determine where we want to automate and how we want to remediate each and every one of those vulnerabilities. And I think that once the security teams actually have this essence and this idea of what's the process, what's the goal, where do I need to automate, the development teams will definitely follow after.
Good, solid advice. Anyone else?
Yeah, I completely agree with the points about process and about kind of looking at automation. I think the one thing I would add is that security teams need to look at how they can help their development counterparts go faster and shift to thinking about how they're contributing to the value stream and what they can do to be less of a constraint in the process. So what can they do to shift the parts of security left that can't be automated and to enable development teams to take on more of those responsibilities themselves.
Fair.
As much as I like Ron's suggestion, go buy all these security tools, I think that's probably not.
We've bought enough security tools in this industry. But go ahead, Andre.
Well, I think that's exactly the issue, that people need to start off with a strategy. They need to start off by asking questions that they can answer in 2020 and really work on a strategic plan to execute that and to answer the questions they care about, whether it's fully understanding their security posture, whether it's fully prioritizing and remediating security issues for their top 2%, 5% applications, whatever the case may be. They need to come up with a strong strategy and really focus on it and answer the questions that they need to answer in order to get to that end goal. And whether that takes one security tool or 5 or a dozen, that will depend on their strategy and how broad or deep they want to go.
Fair enough. Guys, we're over our time limit, so I unfortunately need to end our discussion. I would have loved to have dived deeper. But hey, just in way of plug, next month we'll be at RSA on Monday of RSA week on the 24th, and it's actually a DevSecOps, a DevOps Connect DevSecOps Days event at the Moscone Center. So if any of you out here are going to be at RSA and you're interested in the topic, please join us. We're at Moscone West all day Monday, February 24th. But until then, Ron, Andre, Shri, and Tim, thank you so much for joining and making this a great panel. I hope our audience, as a matter of fact, I'm sure our audience learned something here about DevSecOps. All 4 of these folks and their companies are in the exhibit hall. So if you're watching this, during our virtual event, please go visit the exhibit hall, and you can get more information there and actually chat live with some of the folks. So, Please go check that out. And in the meantime, we'll be back with our next session in just a moment. This is Alan Schimmel for Media Ops. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.